Let's talk now to David Wood, Senior Analyst for Lebanon at Crisis Group. David, good to see you. Welcome. Let's just pick up on that point. How do you think Hezbollah will respond to these attacks?
So I think that if we look at the speech from Hassan Nasrallah today, there are two things that I took from it. And one is, as your correspondent has noted, that there is an element of defiance. So Hezbollah has resisted any efforts by Israel to separate the war in Gaza from the war at the Lebanese-Israeli border, and insisted that until there is an end to hostilities in Gaza, Hezbollah will continue to fight Israel across the border, no matter the cost. So that was a real note of defiance. However, at the same time, as is characteristic of Hassan Nasrallah, he was ambiguous about the details of what the retaliation might look like for this week's attacks. So he said that he would not go into the details in this speech, and that Israel would know when it happened that it was the retaliation. So I think this is a constructive kind of ambiguity from Hezbollah's perspective, giving it flexibility to retaliate, but to continue its pattern throughout the past year of this war, which is to retaliate for every Israeli operation, but at a lower level of intensity to reduce the likelihood that it will set off a spiral of escalation into full-scale war.
You talk about reducing the likelihood. I mean, what do you think all of this means for regional stability?
So I think a key concern throughout this conflict, aside from the obvious, which is to end the hostilities in Gaza and move towards a permanent ceasefire, has been a massive expansion of the war at the Lebanese-Israeli border. And why is that? Because in the axis of resistance, the non-state actors backed by Iran, easily the most powerful of those non-state actors is Hezbollah. Hezbollah has taken a severe blow, which Nasrallah admitted to in his speech through these attacks on communications devices this week, not just operationally in terms of the way that the group communicates with each other, but also in terms of its credibility as a group that's capable of defending not only its supporters, but Lebanon in general. So for that reason, if this particular front was to escalate, given that Hezbollah has reportedly 150,000 rockets and has tens of thousands of dedicated and in some cases very experienced fighters, a full-scale war between Hezbollah and Israel could easily become a regional conflagration.
David, the world's still trying to get its head round the events of the last 3 days or so and just how pagers and walkie-talkie radios can explode. What are the wider implications of that?
Well, in terms of we're talking about the future of conflict generally, it's obviously a very worrying development, and it's clear that while we don't know the specific details, Israel has deeply infiltrated the supply chain of Hezbollah in receiving these communications devices, and had the technical ability to carry out the attacks. So that is a concerning development. But I think if we look at the implications for Lebanon, as your correspondent was mentioning, the psychological damage, apart from the deaths and those who've been wounded directly by these explosions, the psychological impact is not just confined to Hezbollah's community. There are people who have no connection to Hezbollah and maybe are even opposed to Hezbollah and its involvement in the war, who have been terrified by the fact that these explosions were happening all over the country simultaneously. And it may well be that some of these pages or walkie-talkies were being held by a Hezbollah member. In other cases, they might have been on a kitchen table that someone who has no connection to the party or is a child or a civilian was walking past. So for this reason, there's a lot of psychological damage that's been wrought by this operation that extends throughout Lebanon.
David, thank you for that. David Wood, Senior Analyst for Lebanon at Crisis Group.